Strange New Worlds, Season 2, Episode 2. More answers, more questions. Motion sustained. Hey, it is Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, coming at you right here from the heart of Trekland via Portal 47 in Trekland Treks. Just letting the dust settle a bit on all the Star Trek headlines, right? So that you don't get a quick take or a hot take. You get a second opinion from Dr. Trek. Hey, look, I have been writing, editing, witnessing, archiving, dot connecting, interviewing, hosting, and, well, fanning Star Trek for a few years now. And I just wanted to say, boy, courtroom shows can be some of the most static formats for an hour-long drama that are out there, especially in Star Trek. I'm looking at you, matter of perspective, and you too, ex post facto. But then again, in Star Trek, we've got the measure of the man, the drumhead on TNG, and of course, the classic that set the tone, Court Martial, from the original series. Oh, and yes, First Duty too. Have we had a courtroom drama in the modern era of Star Trek? Well, we have now. I want to say kudos to, well, they don't work in a vacuum, but still, kudos to first-time writer Data Horgan, not Horgon, but I love that it's in the vibe. She is no rookie, but she did have 14 episodes over on Supergirl. She had, 2 or 3 seasons as a co-executive producer. She had 27 episodes and 2 seasons over on Once Upon a Time. So, welcome to Star Trek, Dana. For a rookie, this is not great. She also has the 9th episode of the season that we're still waiting on, Subspace Rhapsody. Uhura episode, anyone? And of course, kudos to the director here, Valerie Weiss, for keeping it moving too. Also a first-timer on Star Trek, but no stranger to television, to directing. She has a PhD in molecular pharmacology and biological chemistry from Harvard. A few years ago, decided directing was what she wanted to do. I don't know if it's the fresh DNA, it's just the influx of new blood in the tank, but oh my gosh, I've been seeing raves online about this episode. It could so much have been a little slow moving, but that is not what happens. It is such a wonderful mix of, yes, old school TOS, standalone drama, where you've got the courtroom drama crisply portrayed and produced, but also the old school commentary. And this is one case where we get into the whole eugenics, genetic engineering ban, understandably so from the eugenics wars, but see when it's misapplied, as we've been learning now, to an entire species, an entire culture. And that's what this is about. As a stand-in for the good old Star Trek, that echoing commentary, that analogy to, well, some of the social ills of our time. I want to get to that. What we've got here is a well-intentioned law, and that's something else I want to get to. But it's being misapplied. It's overreaching to an entire culture. It's not protecting anyone. It's persecuting. And that's the pivot point of the episode. It's basically a broad brush overreach. And so the twist in this story, the pivot, it's amazing. Turning all the incriminating negatives into supporting positives and sympathetic proof. Big things, little things. Little things, big things. And this is both. I love the courtroom bell, of course. And I love the lie detector stands. Those are so original series and carried through the years too. But now, the Volterra Nebula. This is the AU Volterra Nebula, as mentioned earlier last season. Not to be confused with the O Volterra Nebula, the Volterra Nebula with an O, that was actually the setup place for The Chase, where Dr. Galen met Picard, and they were off and running, tracking the DNA of all the dominant species way back in TNG days. These are different nebulas. This one's been known since this century. Apparently, it has one planet, because everyone talks about going to the Volterra Nebula without bothering to say what the planet is. So apparently, there's one planet, or one Class M planet anyway, if you want to stretch the definition of Class M to be low on oxygen. And yet they got provisional membership in the Federation the year before Una was born. I know somebody may Some out there may be reacting to the use of the big, thick books. But I got news for you. That's canon. That's books. Books. Nero the attorney here goes full Samuel T. Cogley on us, and I'm here for it. Interesting, though, how the brig room that Una's being kept in, no force fields. It's sliding doors. Interesting. But did you notice that big rotunda, that interesting courtroom, is really the repurposed Federation, the new 32nd century Federation main room, the rotunda, from the latter seasons of Discovery. So, hey, it's dumpster diving the grand Star Trek way on a huge scale, and I'm all for it. It feels right at home. But did you notice what's happening here? Oh, it's so subversively simple. We're actually getting little bits of canon and little bits of character biographies, just slowly, slightly threaded to us right when you're not expecting it. Look, we're hearing about Captain April. Yes, Captain April's 5 years, the first 5 years of the Enterprise, the last half of the 2240s, right? We're hearing about the Peregrines. We're hearing about Planet Norel. We're hearing about the Ohawk on Manus 2. And even learning about how Pike talked to Una's class at the academy when he was a test pilot, which, if you go back, we've had mention of him being a mission test pilot before. What is that? We're making Pike out to be an old school right stuff, hot jet jockey here. Tell me more. Tell me more. And gotta say, Zeus Tlagul, best Tellarite name ever. Going back to when Dorothy invented them. Okay, maybe we'll give the original nod to Gav in Journey to Babel, but I couldn't have done better. And with hair, thank you very much, and sunken eye sockets. A little on the skinny side, but oh well. And he's a Space Command representative, which, yes, harkens right back to Space Command Lindstrom at Kirk's court-martial back in court-martial, which happens in only 6 or 7 years. Best of all, did you realize that David Benjamin Tomlinson is under all that Tellarite hair, having been Linus the Saurian on Discovery all these years? He's an expert in prosthetic acting. And there's a Vulcan on the panel, a Vulcan named Commander Chiv? Okay, one more question. Why was Captain Battelle in Command Gold when she was working in the JAG office, when not just pressed into service, but working in the JAG office, when Ariel Shaw, just 6-7 years later, is in Ops Red, which is what you would expect, right? Now, okay, I know, though, a century later, Captain Philippe Lavoie, when Data is brought up by Commander Maddox on the question of his basic sentient rights, Captain Lavoie is in Command Red and not Ops Gold of the 24th century. It's a question. So obviously, given the time factor still, this is a fluxy situation. So, okay. But even with all these details, that brings us down to, I know, characters. As in, it's so cool to know that La'an graduated at the head of her class at the academy. That's interesting. But did you notice how every time any mention early on came up of genetic engineering, the camera cutaway would catch her for the reaction shot? I mean, I have long wondered what her connection to Khan was, and here we find out. She actually says she's a direct descendant. Now, how does that work? Does she mean direct as in from his progeny still, or are we talking like sibling adjacent? Because did he have a kid? Was the kid left behind on Earth when they jumped off in the Botany Bay? Because we know what happened to the Botany Bay, at least in the prime timeline, right? They all go from the Botany Bay, right to the Enterprise, back to the Botany Bay, and right back to Sati Alpha 5, and the Wipeout later on the Defiant. So if it's a direct lineage, it had to be someone left behind on Earth. Khan was a test tube baby. He wasn't like he was like Bashir was born and then altered. So, or apparently like Una. So what happened to that lineage? I mean, La'an puts her hand on the lie detector, lies about when she knew about Una, and the lie detector wheel doesn't go off. Is there some residual Noonien Singy DNA modification going on here? I'm just saying, throwing it out there. But hey, how about this week's guest star, Natiti Badaka, who it turns out is a huge Trek fan herself, and she has let that be known first to the show's producers and writers, and now to fandom itself. And you know what? She talks about wanting to come back. She says they talk about wanting to have her come back, and no one ever gives an interview like that unless there's something in the wind. So now we have to have A Strange New World season 3, as if that wasn't already a gone thing. But look, why are we so excited? This character, Nira. I mean, did you just love the way the defiance and the steely-eyed social justice behind her? I love the way, as we gradually find out what her backstory is. That's aside from taking on the commentary here about prejudice, even unintended prejudice, and how to relieve it, how to resolve it. Just the storytelling craft here that Dana has of giving us little crumbs one at a time. There are no long speeches, no obvious accoutrograms of backstory here. The little crumbs that you get a little bit at a time. I mean, I initially kind of winced a little bit when she called the eugenics ban a race law, but she's talking about the unintended consequences. She makes that pivot. We didn't see it coming. You know, we can credit Dana again with the great writing and the plotting here, but, you know, in universe, we have to just say, wow, that Nira is something else. Now, I was a little confused because she's Illyrian up front. How was she allowed to come in and plead the case? How was she allowed in a courtroom on Earth? They're in San Francisco, apparently. So Illyria is not that far away. She meets her. How much time has elapsed here? Some little questions. But most of all, apparently Illyrians and their awareness of genetic, it's not about just existing. It's about serving in Starfleet. I want to get back to this. But the craft of the character leading Una herself to give the testimony that she's going to need when she makes that pivot without Una even knowing she's doing it. Yes, this is a character we need to see again. But even before we get to the courtroom scenes, the introduction, Nira and Pike, oh, that is Quip City there. Congratulations, you've discovered empathy. Now, the way he talks, the way he sets out after her, the minute Una is on trial, is getting her plea deal in episode 1, when everyone thought Pike was disappearing from the face of the series. Here he is in full bloom. Do you get the idea that he knew of her? Maybe they hadn't met in person, but it feels like he knew a lot about her. And where is that going to come from? It had to be Una telling him about her over the years. But there is a familiarity there, even if they hadn't met. I'm still dwelling on this. But it's Nira and Una that are the core of the story, the dramatic story, and also the story that unfolds as the commentary on the events of prejudice, the events of sometimes deathly prejudice, much less exclusion, that we're commenting on for today. But did you notice this on the storytelling end here? Did you notice how Nira is always called Nira by nearly everyone? There are a couple of formal references in the court, but we just get it ingrained that we just hear her by her first name. So did you get it that the little boy that Una remembers, who was taken away at 10 years old because he was Illyrian, his name, she remembers it exactly. He was 10-year-old Ivan Katul. That he was Nira Katul's brother. And so now it's personal. It's personal, it's DNA, it's genetic, and her righteous cause is explained. It is motivated. We get the whole arc of her life. And we only got it a little bit of a time, and you're making the audience pay attention. You've got to put 2 and 2 and 2 together. I mean, it's everything you need to know about her life's work, her career, her motivation, her life, and everything you need to know about the dynamic between the two of them. Which brings us, of course, back to Una. Even just some canon and career bits, right? We learned that she too, they were all living in the Volterra Nebula, the AU Volterra Nebula, that Starfleet visited when she was 5 or 6. It was that inspiration, that diversity, textbook diversity of the Starfleet crew, when she was a little girl early in the century. That's what turned her on. That's what promoted her, prompted her, poked her to take on the life that she chose, and that she's now fighting for in this bizarrely heroic, tragic way. It was such a wham moment of inspiration for her, and nothing was going to change that. She also says that she's had a 25-year Starfleet career, which is, I love this. It's 2260. That means something happened in 2235. Was she graduating from the academy, or did she start the academy? And now we've got kind of a timeline feel for when Pike talked to her graduating class. I mean, we've got choices now. It's zeroing in, and it's all coming from something besides a biofile. Some moments this show, watching Pike squirm as the Vulcan admiral on the trial board, Patalk, as he starts to bear down on implicating Pike as part of this conspiracy, right? He's gonna come down on his head and on that, well, the tolerance that he stood up for, and it comes out of the blue. The moment when Spock is making everybody else squirm, wondering how he's going to respond to that. When did you know about the Illyrian Una? And he comes back with the reference to Gilbert and Sullivan, which, of course, is out of the short treks on his first day on the job when he supposedly first meets Una, and they wind up in their duet in the turbolift. I mean, he covers it the way only his logical future self that we're going to know and love could do. I merely exaggerated. I think Leonard would be proud. By the way, Chapel seems to have the least to do of all the main cast here. Now, that's understandable. She had a big role in episode 1. They're going to let her rest a little bit. But did you notice every time there was a major Spock line or reaction, they would cut to her first? Yeah. But I said, lots of answers, lots of questions. So, in the middle of a wonderful, tightly drawn courtroom story, in the middle of old school commentary to beat the band, talking about prejudice, even unintended prejudice, and the way whole groups of people are maligned, are othered, sometimes at the hand of a zealot, perhaps. In the middle of all that, this episode gets me back to an issue that has been bugging me for decades about Star Trek. It's about this whole fuzzy line between Starfleet and the Federation, between the military or the quasi-military Defense Force Scientific Legion and the civilian governmental arm. It's a clear line to me. I don't know why this is so confusing, but there are moments of wibbly wobbliness of this all through Star Trek. Here's a perfect case. Sometimes the legal issues get framed as laws and not regulations. Sometimes if you stray too far from a military tribunal, a service tribunal, you start feeling like a civilian court and vice versa. But I think they passed that test here. This feels pretty much like a service trial. What it brings up secondarily is the other thing that's bugged me for ages. One of those bugs, and that is this whole aftershock era, the trauma that Earth went through from the eugenics wars. Hey, I get it. And I know we're kind of redefining the whole problematic bit of the eugenics wars happening in 1992 to 1996, very definitely said by Spock, first season of the original series, but saying it 30 years before those dates are playing out. Well, kiddos, you were so good at your jobs, you gave us a 60-year franchise that we're looking at the 90s in our rearview mirror, and we have for a long time. And you've got entries like Greg Cox's great series of novels that tried to paint the eugenics wars as the secret war happening only to those who knew it was happening. And yes, we've got Los Angeles doing just fine there on the West Coast in 1996, apparently totally untouched by the eugenics wars, which were said to be the Third World War, which was one of our old retcons. It was the third world that was, so like Eurasia, Africa having it, leaving, I know. It's all the things over the years. Now we've had episode 1, the premiere of Strange New Worlds, which is trying to talk about those 90s eugenics wars records were even so distorted that all the thought about it being in the 90s, move it really into the first third, the first half of this century. Ooh, scary thought. But in the middle of all that, even apart from that, here's the thing no one talks about. We know it traumatized Earth. We know what happened with World War III and Zefram Cochrane and creating the Phoenix and meeting the Vulcans and everybody kind of getting on the path to Federationhood. Thank you, Romulans, for pushing that along. But why do we see eugenics bans still? not just the 23rd century, but the 24th. Why is Dr. Bashir hiding his secret? Why are Dr. Bashir's parents going to being legally punished, serving penal time? Basically, why did Earth's trauma become the entire Federation's? Does every Federation world have a little bit of eugenics wars trauma? Wartime upheaval. Is that part of every planet's backstory? Is that just part of Hodgkin's law of parallel planet development? Look it up. No, I'm serious. I know I always talk about how Earth imposed its will, seemingly, on the rest. Were all the other founders, Vulcan even, much less Teller and Andor, and however you want to define your canon, and all the early colonies and early members along the way, did everybody just go, okay, fine, Earth, we'll go along, we'll make it a Federation-wide eugenics ban? It was your dirty, dark history. We're sad for that. But you know what? Maybe we should do this. And well, I mean, does no one else, if Earth had not had a eugenics war and had this ban on its own books before it merged with its fellow members to form the Federation, would this have been a Federation issue? Did I just blow your mind? Well, good. That's what we're talking about. Illyrians here, the overreach of the eugenics ban. I get it, but why is everybody else so zealously defending it? We've got a Vulcan on the trial board. We've got a Teller on the trial board. And who is this Admiral Patak who is so overly zealous? Now, can I just say, we had to put Captain Battelle down this path. Oh no, it's a rift between her and her good friend, Captain Pike. Is it really going to go this way? She's doing her job at the beginning. Wonderfully how it's handled, that over time she feels worse and worse in the trial. She sees what's really going on here. She sees Nira for what she's doing. She sees Una for what she's doing. As real people, you can tell on her face, it's etching, it's her actions, to the point where the Vulcan admiral is tapping her on the shoulder. Finally, he demotes her mid-trial, takes over, and goes all the way to implicating Pike. He's the reason that trial takes that turn, to the point where the trial board can't ignore it. My point is, what is the bug up his? When did Vulcan care that much about the eugenics? Is that really logical to have the overreach and implications of implicating an entire race? He is so by the board. Is he from the by the board ramrod up your ass school of Vulcanism? Is he just trying to climb the ladder? Because he's sure doing his best Nora Sati there if he's not. I don't understand why the rest of the Federation, or maybe some zealots for their own purposes, are so in love with the eugenics ban. And it's still around a century later. Poor Dr. Bashir. So yeah, Admiral Patak just comes out of nowhere with this. Well, that's a lingering story right there. I even love, even in her sincere testimony, talking about the meanings of the words in Starfleet's motto, right? The title of the episode, "To the stars with difficulty, ad astra per aspera." Una even mentions just in passing that was Starfleet's motto even before the Federation. Meaning, once again, did Earth just cram everything of its own down everybody else's throats when they set everything up for the Federation? They took Earth's service's name, they took its motto, everybody else just piled on in the truck and went along for the ride. I've never understood how the rest of the Federation hasn't pushed back on the Earthnocentrism of the Federation. The Capitol's there, whether you're talking about the council chambers in San Francisco, the president's office in Paris, and I know by now there have to be campuses around, Starfleet academies in San Francisco. I know there's some dispersion of Federation offices, but is everybody just content to let history be Earth was the winner of the Romulan War and everybody else realized they had to team up in self-defense? I just keep waiting for the stories to come out about some of the pushback from some, even well-meaning, from some of these other members. Maybe we'll get a little bit about that. We know it's not all hunky-dory in the Federation circles, going all the way back to Journey to Babel and the political difficulties there. I just like to see some of that brought to bear. And hey, that can be the vehicle for all kinds of commentary and reflection on current policies, current politics, and social issues today. But sure, make no mistake, central thrust of this episode is that this eugenics ban, Federation-wide, no matter how it got there, it applies to all Illyrians, and that does echo all the big, deadly otherings of every generation, maybe every planet. I mean, take your pick, right? And Nira's, her brief but damning comment there about being left behind, it's so innocuously tossed out there. And then as you learn what happened there on the Volterra with an AU, the Volterra Nebula planet, you learn what happened. Her family was left behind, and Una's family in the Great Segregation just faked it, right? They passed as non-Illyrian, just as people once, in the retching phases of history, people once had to try and survive. They tried to pass as Gentile. They tried to pass as white. They maybe tried to pass as male. They tried to pass as straight. Take your pick. Because it's interesting that in this future perfect federation, one can have a career as a civil rights lawyer. How does that happen? Is that totally motivated by her Illyrian culture, Nira's Illyrian culture, and her, her natural deferment? Again, how was she allowed to take part in this trial? What is the spectrum there? Is it only about Illyrians serving in Starfleet that this eugenics ban occurs? Otherwise, nobody has a qualm about walking down the street in broad daylight, beaming into secure places, being an Illyrian when you're just taking part in daily society life. There's all kinds of questions for the greater universe about this eugenics ban in the greater federation. But here and now in this story, the point being, well made, counselor, well made. I mean, look, I'm going to say this, texture, not trivia. This can of worms about Starfleets versus the civilians, about the Federation Earth versus its member worlds, sister worlds, planets, it's not so much a hiccup or a canon issue as it's really a really interesting close-up examination of day-to-day life. It's a wrinkle of living in this universe, and I hope this is not the last we hear about it. This story accomplished its dramatic aims well, excellently, amazingly. People are raving about this episode. And yet, those are the questions that I'm now wanting to dive back into. What about you? Oh, one more thing. Left field, I know, but something is going on. This is the second time in 2 weeks, in 2 episodes, that we've had references to Spock's parents. First, Pelia knowing Amanda, Spock's mother, and now Admiral Pasok in Sarek's colleagues. Are we going to see Spock's parents? Is this a setup? I mean, inquiring minds want to know. We haven't seen them in 3 years. Well, in Star Trek time, 3 years. Stay tuned. Okay. Maybe this is where I sign off for this second opinion. But what about you? What do you think? Leave a comment below. Hey, and like and subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things. Look, you can boost the signal. You can subscribe for some Star Trek sanity, can't you? Most of all, if you crave more Dr. Trek and our Trekland point of view, look, check out every Trek pod and live stream and experience, like the Trek Files from Roddenberry, our podcast, Trekland Tuesdays Live, the live stream, Trekland Trek's day tours, Cadet Alice and Dr. Trek Talk Prodigy. All of that is right there at LarryNemecek.com. Trek well, everybody.